Why the most spiritually awake people are choosing to disappear, and you didn't even notice. As Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." In today's world, more and more spiritually awake people are quietly disappearing, not out of anger, but out of necessity, choosing solitude, silence, and self-preservation over the noise of collective unconsciousness. What does this mean for our own lives? And how can we apply these principles to find greater peace, growth, and happiness every day? I'd love to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's explore this together here on Spiritual Wisdom. 1. Mass exodus of the awakened. Spiritually awake people are quietly withdrawing from the world, not because of anger, but because their souls can no longer breathe in the dense air of unconsciousness. They walk away from the endless noise of social media, where masks and projections replace authenticity, and they step back from careers that once seemed meaningful, but now feel like hollow machines, feeding competition and vanity. They distance themselves from relationships that revolve around surface-level exchange, where true depth and spiritual connection are absent. Carl Jung understood this when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the awakened, remaining immersed in the collective dream feels less like life and more like suffocation, and leaving is no longer a choice, but a necessity. It is not escapism, it is survival. Imagine being trapped in a crowded room filled with smoke and noise. At first, you tolerate it, but when your senses sharpen, every breath burns, and every sound cuts through your mind until you realize that staying would destroy you. Walking out is not weakness, it is intelligence, it is spiritual wisdom. Jung called this the necessary withdrawal, a stage in awakening where solitude becomes medicine. The awakened disappear not to abandon humanity, but to preserve their light in a world that unconsciously tries to dim it. And yet, disappearance is not an end, but a beginning. In the silence of solitude, the mind clears, the soul heals, and the heart begins to align with deeper truths. It is here, away from the chaos, that the true self emerges, and individuation, the process Jung described as becoming whole, unfolds. In this space, the awakened no longer carry the projections of others, no longer bend under the weight of collective expectations. They rediscover the voice within, the intelligence of the soul, the quiet power of authentic being. As Jung reminded us, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. So they vanish from the crowd, but only to return in a different form. They re-enter the world not as followers of collective illusions, but as bearers of clarity, carrying a light that exposes shadows and awakens others. Their absence from the noise is what makes their presence so powerful when they return. This hidden exodus is not a tragedy. It is a transformation, the invisible sign of evolution happening before your eyes. Those who disappear are not lost, they are becoming. If you recognize this great exodus of the awakened, declare it in the comments. I choose the path of spiritual awakening. Let your voice be heard. 2. Collective unconscious as the system. Society often moves on invisible rails, built not from truth, but from the collective unconscious. A web of shared delusions, shadow projections, and unspoken agreements that keep people asleep. Carl Jung warned that once the unconscious is exposed to the light of awareness, it can never be hidden again. And this is why those who awaken become what many call a glitch in the matrix. They suddenly see through the scripts everyone else recites, and what once felt normal now feels unbearably false, as though they are watching actors who have forgotten that the play is not reality. The more awake one becomes, the more painful it is to participate in shallow conversations, to smile at false pleasantries, or to accept relationships built on unconscious projections, because the body itself begins to resist what the mind can no longer deny. This awakening in modern life often shows itself when scrolling through social media, where endless distractions masquerade as connection, when sitting in workplaces where ambition has replaced meaning, or when trapped in social circles where gossip drowns out truth. For the awakened person, these environments feel suffocating, like breathing polluted air, and the only way to survive is to step back. Their retreat is not dramatic but subtle. They deactivate accounts, walk away from prestigious careers, or quietly release relationships where authenticity cannot live. Jung called this withdrawal essential, not a failure, because for a soul that is seen through the veil, continuing to live inside the collective unconscious is not just uncomfortable, it is spiritually unbearable. It is like a musician who once loved the orchestra, but now hears every instrument out of tune. The discord can no longer be ignored, and to sit in the concert hall becomes torture instead of joy. In the same way, the spiritually awake feel every false note in conversations, every projection in relationships, every illusion society clings to, and they cannot unhear that dissonance. Their withdrawal is not arrogance, but necessity, a way to preserve the harmony of the inner self against the noise of the outer world. And yet this disappearance is not an ending, but a transformation. By choosing solitude, the awakened soul discovers silence, clarity, and the deeper rhythms of life that the unconscious world cannot perceive. They no longer explain themselves to people who never listened, nor do they justify their truth to those who cannot see. Instead, they honor the privilege, as Jung said, of becoming who they truly are. In this, their absence from the crowd is not a loss, but a gift, because stepping away allows them to carry wisdom that eventually illuminates the path for others. Withdrawal is not a retreat into emptiness. It is a conscious return to wholeness, where spirituality and spiritual awakening guide them to live not as shadows in society's play, but as sovereign beings who embody truth, even if the world does not yet notice their quiet departure. Stay connected with our spiritual wisdom community by subscribing to the channel, where we uncover deep insights into Carl Jung's teachings and the hidden patterns of the collective unconscious. Together, we explore the path of spiritual awakening and the courage it takes to step outside the system. 3. The curse of consciousness. The curse of consciousness is one of the most striking paradoxes of spirituality and spiritual development. For the deeper a person awakens, the more alone they often feel. Those who reach higher states of awareness begin to perceive life in a deeper dimension, and suddenly, the familiar comfort of society becomes strangely alien. Even when surrounded by others, the conscious soul may feel invisible, not because people are intentionally ignoring them, but because they are tuned into an entirely different frequency. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And this truth captures the silent suffering of those who awaken. Their perception is sharper, their sensitivity heightened, and what once felt ordinary idle gossip, shallow distractions, empty conversations now feel suffocating. Every interaction requires translation, as though they must interpret the unconscious chatter of the world through their own heightened awareness. And this constant filtering exhausts both body and mind until being present in society feels like carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Awakening is not an abstract idea that lives in the mind. It transforms the entire psyche, shaping how the body, emotions, and spirit respond to life. When consciousness expands, there comes a point where the soul can no longer tolerate what drains its energy. Places once alive with joy now feel heavy. Friendships that once brought connection feel misaligned, and ambitions once seen as worthy now seem empty. This is not escapism. It is a natural survival mechanism of the psyche. Jung described this as the necessary withdrawal, a phase in which the awakened mind retreats, not because it despises the world, but because it must shield itself from the unconscious pull of the collective. Like a seed that draws inward before breaking through the soil, this withdrawal is an act of preparation. The spiritually awake are not rejecting life. They are aligning themselves more deeply with it, stepping away so they can live in truth rather than illusion. This path will inevitably bring moments of psychological isolation. If you are experiencing them, understand that it does not mean you are failing or that you are broken. It means you are growing beyond the patterns that once defined you. You may find that the conversations which once lit up your days now leave you feeling hollow, or that being surrounded by many still feels like being unseen. But this is not the end of your journey. It is a threshold. Solitude becomes the crucible in which your inner clarity sharpens, where your energy realigns, and where your spirit learns to walk untethered by the noise of society. In this silence, you find not emptiness, but depth, not abandonment, but rebirth. The value of this stage is to embrace it without resistance. Solitude is not punishment, it is transformation. In your withdrawal, you are being prepared to return to the world, not as someone drowned in the unconscious crowd, but as someone carrying a light that cannot be dimmed. If you feel alone, even in a crowd, know that it is not because you are lost, it is because you are awake. Honor this sacred stage, guard your energy with care, and let your solitude refine you. For spirituality does not demand endless togetherness, it demands truth. And sometimes, truth asks you to step away, so that when you return, you embody a presence strong enough to awaken others. Do you feel the weight of consciousness in your own life? If you do, proclaim it in the comments. I carry the gift of awareness, and I choose wisdom. 4. Persona versus authentic self. The moment you awaken to your authentic self, the persona you once wore like a second skin suddenly becomes unbearable. Because the mask that once helped you survive in workplaces, families, and social circles now feels like a prison. Carl Jung described the persona as the social mask we wear to function in the world. But when you finally see through the illusion, continuing to wear it feels like betrayal of your soul. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this privilege demands courage, because society thrives on masks, not on truth. Think about those moments when you smiled politely in a crowded room while your inner voice begged you to walk away. or when you agreed in silence at work or in family gatherings while every part of you felt the weight of dishonesty. That isn't just social discomfort. It's the ache of your awakened self trying to breathe under layers of expectation. Once you gain intelligence and spiritual wisdom, once you see your truth clearly, pretending is no longer possible. The old roles collapse, and the obedient worker, the dutiful child, or the agreeable friend fades away because the authentic self can no longer tolerate the performance. Jung believed this transformation was not optional, but necessary for psychological survival. The persona protects us when we are young, but if we cling to it as adults, it suffocates the spirit. Spiritually awake individuals feel this suffocation more deeply because they are sensitive to falseness. For them, continuing to act out roles is not harmless. It is soul wounding. This is why they begin to withdraw from environments that demand pretense, why they choose solitude over noise, why they quietly disappear. It is not arrogance, but survival of the true self, a refusal to betray authenticity for the comfort of others. You may have felt this same tension between who you are and who you are expected to be. To maintain the persona means betraying yourself, but to drop it means disappointing others. This razor's edge is the test of awakening, and it explains why many souls who reach higher consciousness retreat from the stage of society. They are no longer willing to act. Kierkegaard warned, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur so quietly that it is as if it were nothing at all." And the spiritually awakened refuse to risk such a loss. When you shed the mask, life can feel lonely, but that loneliness is filled with a deeper strength than any applause or approval could ever give you. The truth becomes non-negotiable. Intelligence without authenticity is empty, and spirituality without truth is hypocrisy. Individuation, the process of becoming your true self, is, as Jung taught, the very purpose of life. By honoring your authentic self, you are not disappearing from the world. You are finally returning to it in your purest form. And your courage gives others permission to do the same. If this truth has touched your soul today, write it boldly in the comments. I choose my authentic self over the mask of persona. I walk in truth. 5. Energetic and psychological burnout. Maintaining consciousness in unconscious environments is not simply tiring. It is a form of invisible labor that slowly consumes the mind and body. Carl Jung called it psychological labor, and it describes the hidden cost of carrying awareness in places where awareness is absent. For those on the path of spirituality and spiritual awakening, every careless projection, every unprocessed emotion from others, every demand of a society driven by speed and noise becomes a weight pressing against their spirit. The result is often fatigue, illness, or depression that cannot be explained by medical charts because the source is not pathology, but energetic depletion. What looks like weakness from the outside is often the soul's defense against drowning in a sea of unconsciousness. To live with a heightened sense of awareness is to feel the friction of every lie, every manipulation, every subtle cruelty that passes unnoticed by the majority. Social media amplifies this unrest with endless conflict and comparison. Workplaces drain vitality with demands disconnected from meaning, and even personal relationships often echo with the unresolved traumas of others. For the spiritually awake, this is not a minor irritation. but a constant abrasion on the psyche, a slow erosion of inner light. That is why many awakened people feel compelled to withdraw. They step back not to escape life, but to preserve their life force. Solitude becomes medicine, silence becomes shield, and retreat becomes the only way to protect the sacred energy that allows consciousness to survive. Jung reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This process of awakening is both a gift and a burden, because to see deeply is also to feel deeply. The projections of others, fear, anger, envy, denial, cling like invisible dust to an awakened spirit, and over time, that accumulation suffocates. Withdrawal, then, is not a failure, but a natural reaction, the psyche's intelligent strategy to survive in a world that is not yet caught up with its depth. In modern life, this reality is intensified. The endless flood of information creates a form of energetic pollution, a noise that unsettles even the strongest soul. If you often feel drained, not by your tasks, but by people, if your body reacts with exhaustion after conversations, if you notice carrying emotions that are not your own, it may be the clear sign that you are absorbing unconscious projections. Spiritual awakening sharpens this sensitivity, and with it comes the responsibility to listen. Burnout is not a collapse. It is a signal. It tells you to rest, to withdraw, to realign with the practices that restore your energy, prayer, meditation, time in nature, or simple stillness. The truth is that protecting your energy is protecting your soul, just as no one would force themselves to keep running on a broken leg. The awakened must not force themselves to remain in environments that corrode their spirit. Choosing solitude, choosing silence, choosing distance is not weakness, but wisdom. It is the courage to honor your inner life above the demands of an unconscious world. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To become who you are requires strength, and that strength is preserved when you refuse to let the world exhaust the very light you were born to shine. If you're still with us on this journey through energetic and psychological burnout, drop a comment below saying, "I'm staying present." Your words let us know you're walking this path with us, and it helps us connect more deeply with you. 6. The hermit phase as archetypal necessity. The hermit phase is not a retreat from life, but an archetypal necessity, a sacred stage in Carl Jung's vision of individuation where the soul demands silence, depth, and honesty. Withdrawal at this stage is not about abandoning the world, but about creating space to face the hidden parts of yourself, to allow the shadow to rise, and to protect the fragile emergence of authenticity. In a world that constantly pressures you to be visible, to perform, and to conform, solitude becomes an act of courage and a form of spiritual intelligence. It is the ground where you can strip away masks, stop negotiating your identity with society, and finally begin to listen to the whisper of your own soul. When Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes," he was pointing directly to this hermit archetype, the deep inner calling that makes spirituality real rather than theoretical. In solitude, the shadow surfaces, the wounds you have ignored, the fears you have buried, and the desires you have suppressed. This confrontation is not comfortable, yet it is essential for spiritual development, because only by integrating these neglected parts of yourself can you move forward with freedom and strength. Just as a seed must rest in darkness before it breaks into the light, your consciousness needs periods of withdrawal to transform into something stronger and more radiant. Modern society often equates stillness with laziness and solitude with loneliness, but spiritual wisdom shows the opposite is true. Stepping back does not mean failure. It means protection of your evolving self. The hermit archetype serves as a guardian of consciousness, reminding you that not all growth happens in the open. True transformation requires quiet seasons where you choose peace over noise, authenticity over performance, and self-reflection over distraction. In daily life, this might mean limiting toxic relationships, stepping away from digital overstimulation, or honoring your need for silence even when others do not understand. The deeper lesson is that solitude is not a void, but a vessel, not emptiness, but fullness waiting to be discovered. When you allow yourself this sacred withdrawal, you cultivate clarity, heal wounds that society keeps you too busy to face, and prepare to re-emerge into the world with renewed vision. The hermit phase is not about escape. It is about alignment. It is the soul's way of protecting itself so that when you return whole, carrying wisdom, resilience, and authenticity that no external approval can give. Through this, spirituality becomes more than belief. It becomes the lived experience of transformation. 7. Disappearance as preparation, not abandonment. When Carl Jung spoke of disappearance, he was pointing to something far deeper than abandonment. It was a sacred preparation of the soul, a purposeful withdrawal guided by intelligence and spiritual wisdom. When the most spiritually awake people retreat, they are not rejecting the world, but stepping into silence where their consciousness can expand beyond the limits of the collective unconscious. Jung saw that the psyche eventually reaches a threshold where living in society's illusions becomes unbearable. So solitude emerges not as luxury, but as a survival mechanism. As Thoreau once said, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." This is not loneliness. It is the crucible where awareness sharpens, where wisdom takes root, and where the awakened quietly transform in stillness. In this retreat, they begin to see life with a clarity that noise and distraction can never offer. Jung's reminder, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes, captures the essence of this journey. Turning inward allows them to touch their authentic self, to cultivate strength and insight that can only grow in silence. Their disappearance is like a seed hidden in the soil, unseen, but preparing to burst forth with new life. Far from abandoning humanity, they are preparing themselves to return with deeper gifts for those who are ready to awaken. When they do return, they bring treasures forged in solitude, wisdom, clarity, and vision. History shows us that prophets, mystics, and thinkers, whether Moses, Buddha, or Jung himself, entered solitude to gather strength and understanding before stepping forward to guide others. In our world today, this disappearance may look like leaving social media, walking away from toxic circles, or turning down shallow measures of success. These choices are not rejections, but acts of alignment, ways of listening to the inner voice that demands truth. And for you, the lesson is clear. If you feel called to step away, trust that instinct. Withdrawal is not weakness, but a sign of your intelligence, a sign that your soul is demanding renewal. Use that sacred space to rebuild your energy, to deepen your spirituality, to sharpen your awareness. When you re-emerge, you will find yourself stronger, more centered, and more authentic. And the world will feel the difference in your presence. As Rumi wrote, the quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. Disappearance is not an ending. It is the pause that allows transformation to unfold. The preparation before you return, carrying light, wisdom, and the power to awaken others. 8. Evolutionary role of the disappeared. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this captures why the most spiritually awake no longer fight to remain in the spotlight of ordinary life, but instead quietly disappear into new roles that carry deeper meaning. Their retreat is not weakness, but transformation, as they re-emerge as artists who give form to invisible truths, healers who restore balance to weary souls, writers who give language to the collective unconscious, and teachers who ignite inner awakenings. They refuse to return to the mainstream because the vibrations of unconscious patterns, endless distractions, and shallow illusions are too heavy to bear once true spiritual awakening has taken place. Instead, they choose the margins, where solitude nourishes creativity, where silence becomes fertile ground, and where they can cultivate spaces of higher consciousness that society does not yet recognize it needs. This disappearance is much like the forest after a fire. To the eye, it may look barren, but beneath the ashes, seeds are germinating, preparing to create a landscape more vibrant than ever before. Those who vanish into solitude are not abandoning the world. They are sowing the conditions for its renewal. In modern life, where social media demands constant attention, careers swallow identity, and relationships are often built on performance rather than truth. Choosing to step away is an act of courage. It is a refusal to lose oneself in chaos and a declaration that depth, clarity, and spiritual wisdom matter more than surface-level validation. Their role is evolutionary, for they are the pioneers of a path humanity will eventually need to walk. Just as explorers once left the village to chart unknown lands, the disappeared venture into the wilderness of the psyche to map out dimensions of intelligence that others have not yet touched. When they reappear, they do so changing eyes sharper, voices truer, presences so magnetic, they shift the energy of every room they enter. Their very existence becomes a mirror that awakens others, showing that the power of spirituality is not measured in how loudly one speaks, but in how deeply one embodies truth. To disappear, then, is not to escape, but to evolve. It is to accept the soul's demand for silence, to honor the psyche's call for survival, and to trust that what grows in solitude will one day serve the collective. In a world obsessed with noise and visibility, this quiet withdrawal is not the end of contribution, but the beginning of its most authentic form. The absence of the awakened is not emptiness. It is the planting of seeds that will blossom into the next stage of human consciousness. And so, while the disappearance of the spiritually awake may remain invisible to the crowd, its meaning is profound. Sometimes the greatest presence is found in absence, and silence itself becomes a message. If this insight has resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who may need to hear it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos. where we continue exploring the deep truths Carl Jung revealed about the soul and the path of awakening. Carl Jung's warning: the hidden peril of seeing what others can't. As Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. On today's journey with spiritual wisdom, we will uncover Jung's hidden warning about the peril of seeing what others cannot, the gift that can either isolate you or transform you into something extraordinary. But the real question is, how can we use this knowledge to grow stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled in our daily lives? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt like you see truths others overlook? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's begin this exploration together. 1. Jung's dangerous discovery. Carl Jung's discovery of differentiated perception revealed a profound spiritual reality. Some individuals are born with the rare ability to perceive what others cannot. They don't just see the surface, they see through it. They detect subtle micro-expressions, hidden motives, repressed emotions, and the silent tension that hovers in conversations long before words are spoken. Their minds are like tuning forks for the human psyche, vibrating in response to the frequencies most people have forgotten how to hear. But this gift, while deeply connected to advanced consciousness and spiritual awakening, does not come without a cost. Jung found that these highly perceptive souls often live in silent suffering, not because they are broken, but because they are awake in a sleeping world. The tragedy is that society mistakes their depth for instability. The spiritually awakened are frequently mislabeled as overthinkers, hypersensitive, or emotionally intense. Yet the truth is, their pain is not born from their sensitivity. It is born from being surrounded by those who numb theirs. They walk through life absorbing energy like sponges, knowing when someone is smiling through grief, sensing deceit before it's spoken, and recognizing patterns that others dismiss as coincidence. But instead of being honored for their perception, they are often shunned for it. Their clarity threatens the illusions people cling to. Jung understood this deeply and warned that those who see too much are either destroyed by their insight or transformed by it. These individuals live with a constant internal contradiction. Their mind craves truth, while their heart yearns for connection. But how do you connect in a world that doesn't recognize the language of the soul? As their awareness grows, so does the emotional distance between them and others. They become mirrors that reflect the hidden wounds people refuse to face. And because of this, people project their shadow onto them. They become scapegoats, repositories for unresolved pain, simply because they refuse to wear the mask. This shadow projection creates a loop where the more light they carry, the more darkness they attract from others. However, this spiritual trial is also the initiation. Jung believed that if these individuals can survive the emotional weight of their insight, they emerge not only with wisdom, but with power. They learn to set sacred boundaries. They begin to protect their energy with the same intensity that once left them drained. They stop explaining their depth to those committed to misunderstanding it. And instead of shrinking, they rise. Their pain becomes purpose. Their isolation becomes refinement. Their curse becomes calling. They evolve into spiritual warriors, wounded but wise, misunderstood, but unshakably aligned. This is the unseen peril. Jung spoke of the danger of awakening in a world that rewards blindness. But if you are one of those rare souls who feels everything, sees everything, and knows everything before it is said, know this: your perception is not madness, it is mastery. It is the silent language of the universe, whispering through your nervous system. And while it may hurt, while it may break you apart, it is also your path to wholeness. Let your inner truth be your compass. Let your boundaries be your sanctuary. And let your spiritual awakening be the fire that burns away the illusion, not the light you dim to make others comfortable. 2. The cost of superior perception. Those who carry the gift of superior perception often walk through life misunderstood, not because they are broken, but because they reflect back the very truths others refuse to face. When you can intuitively sense tension in a room, detect the subtle lies behind a smile, and feel the heaviness of unspoken emotions, you become a walking mirror to the unconscious. Carl Jung understood this well. He observed how individuals with this spiritual intelligence were often blamed not for what they did, but for what they revealed. You see, the moment your presence forces someone to confront the parts of themselves they've kept hidden, you trigger resistance. And when people feel exposed, they don't turn inward, they lash outward. That's how the scapegoat phenomenon is born. You become the easy target for discomfort, guilt, shame, or anger that has nothing to do with you. It's not your truth that hurts them. It's the reflection of their own they cannot escape when you're near. This is the heavy consequence of spiritual development: to see what others can't and to carry what others won't. Your ability to pierce through the illusion makes you invaluable and invisible all at once. Instead of praise, you're met with suspicion. Instead of gratitude, you receive blame. Because your spiritual clarity threatens the illusions others depend on to feel safe. You become the outsider, not because you're wrong, but because you're right too soon. And as you walk this road of awakening, you'll discover the emotional solitude that comes with being awake in a world that sleeps with its eyes open. But this loneliness is not a punishment. It is a preparation, a deepening of your connection with truth, so you can hold space for it without needing permission to exist. It is in this space that your true power begins to blossom, not in being seen by the world, but in seeing the world for what it really is. Those who are spiritually gifted often feel like they don't belong, not because they're weak, but because they're tuned into frequencies most people spend their whole lives trying to ignore. And when you carry this level of awareness, you inevitably encounter the emotional backlash of others who are unconsciously triggered by your presence. Their shadow recognizes your light before their conscious mind can name what it feels. That is the cost of seeing through illusions. You become the reminder people didn't ask for. But your role is not to fix their discomfort. Your role is to stay rooted in your own spiritual wisdom, to continue the journey not with bitterness, but with reverence for the truth you've been entrusted to carry. The real battle is not external. It's in not shrinking your light just to make others comfortable in their denial. Every time you are misunderstood, blamed, or pushed away for simply being aware, remember, this is a signal of how deeply your perception is needed. Your gift was never meant to be popular. It was meant to be sacred. So don't trade your clarity for company. Don't dim your spiritual insight for acceptance. This journey is not about being liked. It's about being aligned with the truth that calls you forward. You are not alone. You are ahead. Keep walking. 3. 4 patterns of perception. Carl Jung revealed that seeing what others can't is not always a gift. It can be a psychological and spiritual burden that few understand. He identified 4 patterns of introverted intuitive perception, each reflecting a unique kind of intelligence and spiritual sensitivity. The first is the feeling intuitive, someone who doesn't merely recognize emotions, they absorb them. These individuals step into a room and instantly feel the emotional undercurrents no one speaks of. The sadness behind polite smiles, the anxiety beneath calm words. They are emotional sponges, and without boundaries or grounding practices, their gift turns into chronic fatigue, anxiety, or emotional burnout. Their challenge is to alchemize emotional chaos into compassion without becoming consumed by it. Then there is the thinking intuitive, a deeply analytical type who sees invisible patterns and anticipates future outcomes with surgical precision. They are often misunderstood, perceived as too intense or controlling, when in truth, they are simply perceiving the natural flow of events before others catch on. These people often feel lonely in their intelligence, burdened by the foresight that isolates them. Yet their spiritual growth lies in learning to trust divine timing and not always needing others to validate what they already know. Their wisdom becomes truly powerful when shared with humility and patience. The sensation. Intuitive brings another layer of perception, the ability to detect psychological wounds through the body. These individuals feel the truth in someone's physical presence, noticing subtle shifts in voice, posture, or energy that speak louder than words. They can sense inner turmoil behind a straight face, or trauma locked within a stiff spine. Often, they feel compelled to heal others, but this desire can become a trap if they don't learn to protect their own vitality. Their spiritual path involves learning when to intervene and when to let go, understanding that not every signal is their responsibility to fix. Finally, the pure intuitive is a rare and often overwhelmed soul. This person receives a non-stop flow of symbolic, unconscious, and archetypal information. Their dreams are vivid, their visions prophetic, their thoughts abstract and otherworldly. But this gift can easily become a curse if they don't anchor it in structure and clarity. They may become disoriented, anxious, or lost in the flood of unprocessed spiritual data. Jung believed these individuals must develop strong inner discipline to bring order to the chaos, turning raw intuition into spiritual insight that serves rather than confuses. Each of these intuitive types carries a deep spiritual wisdom that, when misunderstood, leads to suffering, but when honored, becomes a source of inner power and sacred intelligence. Jung's work was a warning that extraordinary perception is not simply a talent, it is a responsibility. And those who see what others can't must learn how to protect their minds, care for their energy, and give themselves the grace to be misunderstood while they walk a path few dare to tread. 4. The 3 dangers. Jung revealed that the danger of heightened perception is not in the ability itself, but in the psychological cost of seeing what others cannot bear to see. When a person awakens to a deeper layer of reality able to detect lies without words, sense emotional tension in silence, or read what's beneath the mask of civility, they don't just gain insight, they inherit a burden. The first danger, as Jung described, is the disruption of the collective unconscious. Society depends on unspoken agreements, illusions we silently co-create to keep the world stable and digestible. But when one person breaks this spell and exposes hidden truths, it destabilizes the entire group dynamic. Their awareness becomes a mirror people avoid, because to see through illusion means confronting pain, shame, and fear that have been long buried. This threat to social harmony doesn't provoke celebration. It provokes rejection, blame, or isolation. That leads to the second danger, psychological isolation. The more attuned you are to the spiritual undercurrents and emotional vibrations around you, the harder it is to remain connected to those who are still asleep. You start feeling like a foreigner in your own home, like a soul surrounded by bodies that have forgotten they carry one. Empaths and spiritually awakened individuals often describe this estrangement not because they are superior, but because they cannot unsee what they've seen. When everyone else is speaking the language of illusion and you've learned the dialect of truth, conversation becomes hollow. Relationships become strained, and belonging becomes a memory rather than a reality. Without grounded spiritual wisdom and practices that anchor your sensitivity, you drift farther from others and closer to an inner void. But the most dangerous cost of all is identity dissolution, what Jung called participation mystique. In your heightened state of perception, you don't just observe others' unconscious energies, you absorb them. Their sadness becomes your sorrow. Their fear becomes your anxiety. Their confusion distorts your clarity. Over time, your own sense of self becomes blurred, like ink dropped in water. You begin to lose yourself, not in dreams, but in the psychic debris of everyone around you. This happens slowly, subtly, and often unconsciously. You might feel fatigued, scattered, or emotionally overwhelmed without realizing you've become an energetic sponge. The gift of deep perception turns into a curse when you carry everyone's truth, but forget your own. Without inner discernment and a strong sense of spiritual selfhood, you disappear into the very chaos you once tried to decode. And yet, this peril is also an initiation. It is not a punishment for being sensitive. It is a challenge to become sovereign. Spiritual awakening is not just about seeing. It is about holding your center when everything else pulls at your soul. Intelligence without integration leads to fragmentation. The spiritually wise don't just perceive, they protect their perception with boundaries, rituals, and a deep understanding of their purpose. To navigate the dangers Jung warned of, you must know how to carry your gift without letting it consume you. Because in the end, the awakened ones are not just those who see. They are those who learn to stay whole in a fractured world. 5. The path of integration. Individuation process. To truly survive and evolve, highly perceptive individuals must develop the rare ability to distinguish between what belongs to them and what they're unconsciously absorbing from the world around them. Without this essential discernment, they risk carrying emotional weight that was never theirs, to begin with other people's fears, projections, anxieties, and hidden resentments. This invisible burden becomes a silent toxin, eroding their well-being from within. Jung warned that such sensitivity, when left unguarded, doesn't just isolate, it destroys. Recognizing the boundary between the self and others is not a theoretical exercise. It is the foundation of spiritual development. Only by identifying what is theirs can these individuals begin to reclaim their energy and navigate life from a place of centered clarity instead of emotional chaos. But separating yourself from others' emotions isn't enough. The next stage of spiritual development requires turning inward and confronting the parts of yourself that you've long ignored or denied your shadow. Carl Jung stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." If you haven't met your own shadow, you will inevitably become entangled in others' darkness. People will project their unacknowledged pain onto you, and without shadow integration, you'll unconsciously absorb and even mirror it. By facing your own inner wounds, your shame, your fear of abandonment, your buried rage, you begin the sacred process of inner alchemy. You stop attracting relationships that reflect your unhealed parts. You stop repeating patterns that only deepen your pain. You reclaim your personal power by owning your story instead of being haunted by it. Once you've established internal clarity and done the work of shadow integration, you are called to a higher task, participating in the world without being consumed by it. Jung emphasized the necessity of building psychological containers, spaces within your mind and soul, where you can hold the unconscious content of others without internalizing it. This is the difference between drowning in emotional waves and becoming the ocean that holds them. You learn to be present without being penetrated, to witness pain without collapsing under it, to listen deeply without losing your voice. In doing so, you become the container, the sacred space, the mirror that reflects without absorbing. You develop emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel everything and still choose what to embody. Your sensitivity becomes your strength, not your downfall. In everyday life, this looks like setting boundaries with grace, honoring your need for solitude, practicing spiritual hygiene through journaling, breathwork, and mindful detachment. It means learning to say no without guilt and yes without self-betrayal. It's about choosing connections that nourish rather than drain you, and understanding that not every cry for help requires your sacrifice. Spirituality isn't about escaping into higher realms. It's about learning how to stay grounded in this one while carrying the wisdom of many. The awakened soul doesn't shut down to survive. It transforms to serve. And in that transformation, perception becomes power, sensitivity becomes intelligence, and every wound becomes a doorway to deeper spiritual awakening. 6. Examples of outcomes. Carl Jung's warning about the hidden peril of seeing what others can't is not just a psychological insight, it's a spiritual initiation. The ability to perceive beyond the surface, to intuitively grasp the invisible threads of emotion, truth, and shadow is often mistaken for a gift. But what if that very gift becomes the burden that isolates you, dismantles your reality, or pushes you toward the edge of madness? Jung observed that those with heightened perceptual intelligence, those who detect subtle cues, unspoken tensions, or the unconscious motives of others, often pay a heavy psychological price, not because they are broken, but because the weight of what they see cannot be carried without inner structure, humility, and integration. And history offers examples of both collapse and transcendence. Nietzsche, a man of staggering intellect, saw too much, too fast, and too raw. He dissected the illusions of morality, religion, and culture with the precision of a prophet, but without a spiritual container to hold that fire, it burned through him. His breakdown wasn't due to weakness, but from being overwhelmed by truths he could not emotionally process. His spiritual intelligence turned self-destructive because it lacked grounding and wholeness. In contrast, Meister Eckhart, a mystic who also saw deeply into the human soul, chose a path of surrender. He did not weaponize insight. He sanctified it. His spiritual awakening came not through domination of knowledge, but through union with the divine mystery. He didn't collapse under truth. He became a vessel of it. Through humility and devotion, his vision transformed into compassion, not condemnation. His integration allowed him to see clearly, without fragmenting his identity, proving that perception becomes wisdom only when it is rooted in stillness. And Carl Jung, standing between these two paths, faced the same abyss. His own psychological descent into the unconscious nearly destroyed him. But instead of resisting, he documented, he painted, he dialogued with the archetypes within. He chose the long road of individuation. In facing his shadow and making it conscious, Jung didn't just survive, he evolved. He taught us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that only by embracing the darkness within can we illuminate the path ahead. Spiritual wisdom, then, is not the result of what you see. It's how you live with what you see. It's not the perception alone, but the integration of that perception with purpose, heart, and self-awareness that determines whether the insight heals or harms. To see what others can't is to be entrusted with a sacred task. To transmute insight into intelligence and intelligence into love. Without that, perception becomes poison. With it, perception becomes power. 7. Relationships that help integration. Carl Jung, in his profound psychological and spiritual wisdom, identified 3 rare types of relationships that serve as stabilizers during the turbulent process of individuation, when one begins the sacred journey of integrating the conscious self with the unconscious depths. The first is the presence of fellow individuated people, those who have already walked through their own inner darkness, faced their shadow, and emerged with a sense of grounded authenticity. These individuals don't just tolerate your truth, they honor it. Being around them feels like a spiritual homecoming. They recognize your growth without fear, without projection, without competition. Their intelligence is quiet, their spiritual wisdom hard-earned, and their mere presence gives you permission to fully be yourself without performance. Then there are those who are still undergoing the individuation process. They are seekers, like you wounded, searching, unfolding. They may still be in the storm, but they are not asleep. They are honest about their flaws, their inner work, and their desire to grow. Their humility creates a mirror for your own transformation. In their presence, you don't feel pressure to be perfect. You feel inspired to stay committed to your path. They're the ones who cry with you, question everything with you, and remind you that healing is not linear. And Jung speaks of natural containers, stable, grounded individuals who might not speak the language of spirituality or shadow work, but who have an intuitive emotional sturdiness. They are not threatened by intensity. They don't rush your process. They don't pathologize your feelings. They simply sit with you, witness you, and allow you to unfold without fear. In the chaos of modern life, where most relationships are transactional or superficial, these people are rare. But when found, they act as quiet sanctuaries. They don't talk much about spiritual awakening, but they embody a deep, silent support that is more healing than 1,000 words. These 3 types of relationships are essential because the deeper you journey into the psyche, the more selective you must become. The soul craves resonance, not noise. Integration is not just an internal process. It is shaped, triggered, and held by those around you. Choose carefully. Not everyone is equipped to hold the truth of who you are becoming. Not everyone deserves access to your unfolding. This path is sacred, and it requires companions who understand that awakening is not a trend, but a lifelong unraveling into wholeness. 8. The 4 stages of transformation. The 4 stages of transformation: recognition without overwhelm, integration without isolation, service without self-sacrifice, and legacy without attachment are not static checkpoints, but living energies within the soul's ongoing process of spiritual development. Recognition without overwhelm is the awakening of inner sight, a moment when you begin to witness your patterns, traumas, and hidden fears without collapsing under their weight. It is the sacred shift from unconscious reaction to conscious observation. You don't try to fix everything at once. You simply allow yourself to see, to name what has been suppressed, and to hold space for your own complexity. This is the foundation of spirituality, because only through awareness can healing begin. As you move deeper, integration without isolation becomes essential. Many who awaken spiritually feel the urge to withdraw, to protect themselves from a world that no longer feels aligned. But real integration asks you to stay in your body, your relationships, your responsibilities, and bring your higher awareness with you. You do not have to exile yourself in order to evolve. In fact, the test of spiritual growth is not how long you can meditate in silence, but how consciously you can live amid chaos, how gently you can respond when triggered, and how deeply you can remain rooted while interacting with others who are still asleep. This leads to service without self-sacrifice, where your light becomes a gift to others, not as a martyr, but as a vessel of overflow. True service is not about rescuing or draining yourself to be worthy. It is about offering what flows naturally from the healed places within you. Carl Jung warned of the dangers of identification with the savior archetype, where the desire to help becomes a trap of ego disguised as virtue. Real service honors both your yes and your no. It knows that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and that boundaries are not barriers. They are sacred containers of your energy. The final stage, legacy without attachment, is perhaps the most advanced form of spiritual maturity. It is the release of control over how your impact is received, remembered, or even acknowledged. You create, you teach, you love, and you let go. You no longer measure your worth by recognition, nor your value by results. Like a tree that sheds its fruit without asking who will eat it, you contribute your essence to the world without clinging to outcomes. This detachment is not coldness, it is wisdom. It is the trust that everything you offer from the soul becomes part of a larger pattern beyond your comprehension. And in this trust, you become free. The entire cycle of transformation is not meant to be completed. Once and for all, it is a spiral. You return again and again, each time with deeper understanding, sharper clarity, and softer presence. Spirituality is not perfection. It is the art of walking through fire without losing your gentleness, of standing in the storm while staying anchored in truth, of choosing love over fear when your wounds beg you to run. And through this dance of shadow and light, the soul learns not just to awaken, but to embody that awakening, moment by moment, breath by breath. 9. Pitfalls that derail the journey. Carl Jung's insights into the spiritual path revealed not only its beauty, but its hidden dangers, particularly for those who begin to see what others can't. One of the most common and deceptive pitfalls is the inflation trap, where individuals who experience deep spiritual awakenings start to believe they are prophets or chosen ones, superior to others. This illusion of elevated status feeds the ego under the guise of spiritual growth, making one believe they have transcended the human condition, when in truth, they've simply fallen into a more subtle form of self-delusion. Jung warned that true intelligence and spiritual wisdom require humility, not grandiosity. The more awakened you become, the more grounded you must be, because the moment you start to think you're above others is the exact moment you separate yourself from the truth of oneness. Closely tied to this is the withdrawal trap, where the awakened soul, overwhelmed by the artificiality and suffering of the world, feels the urge to isolate completely. But while solitude is essential for clarity, total rejection of society often leads to alienation and despair. Jung believed that transformation isn't about running from the world, but learning how to live in it without losing your soul. The challenge lies in walking among illusions while maintaining inner truth. Spiritual awakening isn't permission to disappear from humanity. It's a call to return with deeper presence and light. Another subtle danger is the helper's trap, where one loses themselves in the endless mission of saving others. This is especially common among empaths, who naturally absorb and heal the pain around them. But when your identity becomes tied to being the rescuer, you forget your own healing. Jung emphasized that martyrdom is not the path to wholeness. Intelligence and spiritual wisdom means knowing when to give and when to retreat, when to offer your light and when to protect it. Helping others cannot come at the cost of your own soul. And finally, there's the overwhelming relapse, when spiritual growth feels like it's collapsing under pressure. In moments of stress, old behaviors return, and it can feel like all progress has vanished. But Jung reminds us that this is not failure. It's a deeper layer of the unconscious revealing itself. True awakening is not linear. You rise, you fall, and you rise again each time with more awareness. Regression is part of the path. What matters is not staying perfect, but staying present. Because the real test of spiritual intelligence is not how much light you can hold in peace, but how much light you can carry through the storm. 10. The evolutionary role. They are not broken. They are advanced. Those whom Carl Jung called consciousness pioneers are not here to adapt to the world, but to transform it. Their spiritual awakening is not a side effect of sensitivity. It is the evolution of perception itself. While others are content with surfaces, these individuals are burdened with depth. They see what others won't look at, feel what others deny, and know what hasn't yet been said. Their insight pierces illusions, and that piercing often hurts not just them, but the collective psyche that resists being exposed. And yet, Their purpose is not to suffer under the weight of what they see. Their purpose is to awaken humanity to bring what is hidden in the shadows into the light of collective understanding, to initiate healing by making the unconscious conscious. In Jung's words, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is their mission, not to escape the darkness, but to walk through it holding the torch for others. This gift, however, comes with a price. In a world addicted to comfort and conformity, they are often misunderstood, mislabeled, and even feared. People mistake their deep perception for weakness or instability, not realizing that it takes immense inner strength to carry so much psychic truth. But these individuals are not fragile. They are forged by the very forces they are meant to transform. Their emotional intelligence is not excess. It is evolutionary. They are not simply reacting. They are translating energetic data, decoding spiritual signals, and holding space for what others repress. In the workplace, they spot dysfunction before it erupts. In relationships, they sense betrayal before it occurs. In society, they detect systemic collapse before the headlines catch up. This level of perception isolates them, yes, but it also places them in the unique position of leading the shift. Their pain is prophetic, their intuition is instructional, and their wisdom is ancestral. They are not here to be validated by the old system. They are here to be the architects of the new. And so, their role is not just personal, it is profoundly collective. Every time they alchemize confusion into clarity, or fear into understanding, they are participating in the slow but necessary evolution of human consciousness. Spirituality is not about escaping the world, but about awakening within it. And those with this gift are the front line of that awakening. They are not just empaths or intuitives. They are energetic surgeons, karmic decoders, and pattern breakers. They show us that spiritual wisdom is not found in books alone, but in the courage to face what others avoid. Their journey is not for applause, but for alignment, not for fame, but for frequency. And while the path may feel lonely, it is never empty. For every insight, every breakthrough, every moment of quiet knowing moves the collective forward. And so, as Carl Jung warned us, the ability to see what others can't is both a gift and a hidden peril. It can isolate you, test you, and at times, even break you. But if embraced with wisdom, it can also transform you into something extraordinary. The question is, how will you carry this vision in your own life? If you found this message meaningful, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming insights into the deep mysteries of the human soul. Until next time, keep seeking, keep awakening, and remember, your perception is your power.